All right. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Masculine Mastery Summit. I am your co host, Christopher August, and today I am joined with Stefano Sifandos. What's up, my brother? How are you?
Good, man. How are you?
Awesome. Thank you for hopping on here today. And, you know, really for me, bringing you on is really an honor just because of your background and your expertise and really everything that you address around the space of relationships and not only the relationship to oneself, which is obviously the most important, but also the relationship with others. And I know a lot of the men listening to this interview and this conversation today, probably are experiencing some perhaps challenges within the relational space, whether they have a partner at this current time or not. So, I guess just to start it off, what is some of the most, I guess, crucial challenges that you see men facing today as it pertains to their relationships?
Man, so many, right? And, one of the reasons why I delved into this space with clear direction was because I wanted to learn and grow through my own relational mishaps. I wanted to understand myself in deeper ways. And, I'm very much on that path right now and have been for many, many years. I don't think it's a question of what if we're in relationship, it's the quality of the relationship that we're in. And I learn every day in my intimate relationship with my wife, with my daughter, with my friends, with my brothers, where there's conflict and friction and how to navigate that and not going into old ways. And this is answering your question, right? I'm getting there. Is part of the big challenge that we face as humans, but as men, is unconsciously and unknowingly holding on to our pain and unresolved trauma that leaks out in reactivity, and it plays out in certain dynamics which matches the other person's trauma bond, and we're unconsciously battling with each other, seeking to protect the fragility of our hearts and or our egos, not even knowing it. It can come out in aggression, it can come out in stonewalling, it can come out in impatience, it can come out in the micro moments of interaction, it can blow up and be violence, it can be leaving and abandoning our partners because that's what was done to us and that's all we know. So to answer your question really directly, it's not that the biggest challenges we face at a macro level is not dealing with our unresolved stuff, and it shows up in so many different ways. It shows up in avoiding attachment style. It can show up in being non-committal. It can show up in tolerating, so we're just going to settle. And a perfect example of that is there's a distance in sexuality and sexual intimacy in the partnership, and the man will either go to shadow sexuality where he'll cheat, he'll be unfaithful in the relationship, instead of having an honest conversation and sharing what's really happening for him and what his needs and desires are. Inability to communicate our needs and desires. Again, all of that though stems from unresolved stuff within ourselves that largely happened, of course, in our past, but largely during our developmental years when we were children. Where our formative years, they're called the formative years for a reason. So much of who we are as adults is formed during those times.
Yeah, and you brought up so many beautiful points there, and I think one of the biggest things that we can learn as men is how to really work and alchemize our emotions and our emotional landscapes, because we haven't really been taught that. And clearly, as we're moving into partnership with another, that if that part of us, if we don't understand the depth of our emotional landscape, if we don't understand the depth of our wounding, then that, what I'm hearing you say, is clearly going to play out with another in relationship. And so, yeah, let's just speak to the emotional landscape for a moment here, because this is really a key point. So, what are some ways that men can begin to understand this part of themselves and begin to work with this aspect of themselves?
Yeah, be with other men. Right, that's the first. I'll obviously elaborate and expand on that, but very simply put, be with other men. Let me tell you why this is so important. So, firstly, two men are familiar. It's one of the reasons why, one of the core reasons why, when we look at traditional rites of passage, traditional meaning cross cultural, older rites of passage from boyhood to manhood, not boyhood to teenagehood to manhood, but boyhood to manhood. We looked at that, and a big part of that for the vast majority of cultures, dare I say all of them, were those boys would go and be with men. At a certain age, they would move away from the mother and they would go and be with men. They would be in the presence of familiarity, and they would learn, monkey see, monkey do. They would learn and grow from the practices and the rituals and the ceremonies that men would hold. And they would learn in that way. Then they would go on their various rites of passage and move through that, but in the presence of men. They'll be left by men, they'll be greeted by men. And that's how that self-identity is formed. That's how they learn to emotionally regulate. That's how they learn to deal with challenges. That's how they learn the cultural values and the norms of that particular culture. So when we surround ourselves with other men, and men are so isolated in this day and age, so isolated, not only from a collectivist level, meaning that our society, our highly individualistic society promotes us being winners, being highly competitive, separating ourselves from the rest. Nothing wrong with competition, nothing wrong with winning, by the way. It's the way that it's done in excess, and it comes from a wound of we're not enough. We have to prove ourselves because we feel empty inside. Part of that is because of our culture. Part of that is because of the dysfunction in our families as we grow up. And so this sense of isolation, I've got to be better than the person next to me. I don't trust the men. Well, that's another thing. I don't trust the men in my life. I don't have close men in my life because I wasn't close to my father. I don't know what that feels like, or my father left, or I have anger towards the masculine and towards men, or men have hurt me in the past, or all of the above, or a combination of that. And so we don't learn how to emotionally regulate. Couple that with society telling us big boys don't cry, as an example, right? It's not masculine to show emotion. We struggle in these areas. So when we surround ourselves with other healthy men, deliberately, like be part of a men's group, seek male friendship, practice vulnerability, look at the low-hanging fruit around that. I'm not saying to pour your heart out to another man. It may be too intense for him and it may be too overwhelming for you as well. But be surrounded by men that want to do inner work, that share those values of exploration, that share the value of growth. And then there you can start to express yourself in ways you haven't before because it's a safe place. You make agreements in that men's group or even in your friendships. Like, this is a place of non-shaming and non-judgment. I'm going to bring some funky things here. Can you hold that? And if at any point you can't, here's our agreement of what that looks like. But it's not going to be, oh, what the fuck is wrong with you? Or there's something wrong with you, or that's disgusting. Because then we're just going to contract again and we're just going to hide. And then when our women, the women in our lives, want us to share and feel and relate and empathize, we're too shut down. We can't do it. So we need to practice in the presence of other men. I think that's a really good start. And, you know, all men, all of us can use more healthy male friendship in our lives, right? So I think that's a really powerful and a simple place to start. Not easy. It's not easy because it's going to require you as an individual to move beyond some of your stuff. So you may have to work with a therapist or a coach or someone that can support you in breaking through maybe the first barrier of resistance to then have you join a larger group where you're witnessed by other men, because there's something very special to be witnessed by another human being in a compassionate, non-judgmental way, especially when it's a familiar space, because you're then healing lineage, you're healing history, you're healing and repairing a relationship with your father without even knowing. Not every man has a father wound. Not every man has had a tough time with their father. The majority have, though, I would say. The vast majority. Don't know what the percentage is. It would be anecdotal anyway. I would say 90+%, just from my experience working with hundreds of thousands of people, thousands of men. That's what I would say.
Yeah. I mean, just speaking from my own personal experience as well, you know, like most of the depth of the healing that I've experienced has been around other men. And of course, exactly why we're having this conversation today and bringing these conversations to the forefront for other men that are seeking to truly heal and transform themselves from the inside out. And I love how you went there and the importance of that. And I think the other really key point here is around being witnessed. This is something that we don't really bring a lot of attention to all of the time, but I believe being witnessed is the medicine that we all need, especially in a group setting like that, when someone can fully release and to reveal the depths of perhaps something they've been keeping inside themselves for so long, what that can actually do from just a full cathartic standpoint of fully clearing, purifying, and releasing what is there within them.
Yeah, big time, man.
And so I guess just to make the connection here and the correlation. So a man going into a men's space, having these experiences with other men, being able to be vulnerable and authentic in the presence of another man or men, how does that then translate into the relationship when they can come back home to their partner, whoever it is, to their friendships, to their children? How does that translate?
Yeah, two core ways. One is improved and evolved self-awareness. And if we have self-awareness, we have more access to something that's tangible within us, because now we've transferred, we've made the unknown known, so we can work with it and we can evolve it and improve it. And the second is practice, exposure, simple as that. The more we practice being a certain way that we want to be, okay, even albeit difficult, the greater efficacy that we have in the practice of that outside of that safe environment. So if you practice being vulnerable, if you practice sharing some of your toughest stuff, right? And now I'm going to lead on to something, one more thing after this, actually, that's connected to this. But if you practice unloading the burden and that you carry, you will be better practiced in also doing that in appropriate ways and different ways with your partner. There are agreements and there are ways to do that are healthy as well. It will be different for your men's group to how you do it with your partner, right? Because of the masculine, feminine, energetic dynamics. Another thing is when you release that load, and I'm not talking about semen and ejaculate, I'm talking about when you release the heavy emotional load that you've been carrying for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 decades, because I see men in their 70s, I work with men in their 70s, in their 80s, releasing so much pain from a completely different era to us. Boys that are still in this male elderly body. They're elders. They're olders, they're not elders. And they're suffering. And so when we release that burden, we release that pain, we're lighter in our constitution, in our spiritual, emotional bodies. We don't have to be so defensive. We don't have to be so protective anymore. So when our partners do something or say something that hurts us, instead of us immediately in our nervous systems going red alert, you have to protect, because we've healed so much of the core wounds, because we've been in practice with that, we're less reactive. And we may approach with curiosity and compassion now. What could happen then? Maybe she gets less triggered. She's taken aback. She apologizes. Or she moves in a different direction. So now you're not in this old dynamic that's unhealthy. Now, I must admit, I struggle to do that in the moment. Still struggle, not all the time, but honestly, most of the time, especially if I'm overwhelmed or I'm stressed. So life's going to happen to us. But our commitment to each other with Christine is, can we come back to repair? What does it look like to come back to repair? Not to sweep it under the rug, definitely not. But to come back to repair, to acknowledge, to sincerely apologize, to take ownership, to continue to be more aware. So instead of it being 10 seconds later or a minute later or a day later where we recognize the thing that we've done, can we do it in the moment so it doesn't happen? But that requires deeper healing, to do it authentically, because you can suppress it and repress it. I can do that, but I don't want to do that. That's fine. That's not a bad thing. In the beginning stages, you may have to just bite your tongue. Cool, because then you don't perpetuate it, and then you come back when you're calmer, and that's great. But can you get to a point eventually? And I don't think this is striving for perfection. I think this is very attainable. But can you get to a point where it genuinely doesn't bother you? And that's a practice, and that takes fucking years. Like, if anyone thinks it's going to take days, and look, for some it may. On the skew of the graph, they're going to be in the very, very high percentile, or the very rare cases, right? And the bell curve, for example, they're going to be down here or down here. But this takes years. You've got to commit. You've got to be willing, and you've got to keep coming back to that. Like, I was sharing something with a friend of mine this morning. He was asking me something, just a bit genuinely inquiring about my partnership. And I said, yeah, there's some of this that's happening now where both under a little stress, and we're both a little reactive, and I can see it. And my work is to not be reactive in the moment, but that just isn't my work with Christine. That's been my work for I'm 41, for 41 years, essentially, because that's what I grew up with. So it was there well before Christine. So blaming her and making it, a product of the relationship is inaccurate, that particular pattern within me. So it's that level of ownership and that level of continued practice. Ownership meaning I'm not pretending everything's great. Like, yeah, I know a bunch of stuff around relationships and communication tools and, polarity dynamics and all the things, right? And intimacy and everything that falls under those categories and more. It doesn't mean I'm great at it. I have aptitude and I have authenticity in so much of it, and I'm still a work in progress. And I think admitting that and owning that actually gives us permission to go into the thing that we're working on, so we don't run from it, we don't hide from it. And that's part of my work as well, personally.
Yeah, I really appreciate you expressing that vulnerably and openly as well. And of course, we all have these sort of patterns that we bring into our relationship dynamics. And, everything you spoke to feels very familiar for me as well. And still, of course, things being worked through. And, I would say, and perhaps I would love your insight into this, but, what we hear a lot of, women say is they really desire this emotional intimacy. And I think one of the first prerequisites to that is to be seen and to be heard. And even as individuals, we desire that, right? Whether men, women, whatever. And so, if we were to go into that a little bit, like beyond just that of being seen and actually putting that into practice, I think a lot of times, at least for myself, and I know this is common for a lot of men, we talk about reactivity, right? And it's like the desire to fix or to solve something right in that moment. It's like, I don't want to hear this. I'm just going to try to bring a solution to this right now. But like, that's not really what this other person wants in this moment. They just want to be witnessed in themselves and what they're experiencing. And perhaps it's very chaotic in that moment. So can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, man. Firstly, one of the greatest things that we can do for someone else and for even ourselves, the parts of ourselves that are hurt, is to witness ourselves and to witness others, to see others, again, through non-judgmental eyes and with compassion and curiosity. So compassion, curiosity, and non-judgment. And, it's interesting, the word reacting, or we react. We're literally reacting old patterns, right? And so if we go into a dynamic where our partner is in distress, and unless she's directly asking for a solution, I guarantee you, all she wants in that moment is to be held, is to be loved, is to be witnessed in non-compassion, is in non-judgment and compassion, and to be shown that you're a safe space for her to express. And then the solutions can definitely come later. Of course, we live in a 3D world where we physically animate. At some point, we'll probably need solutions. But in that moment, more than likely not. We just want to know that we're not alone in our pain and in our suffering. Compassion, to suffer with. I'm not saying that you should suffer with your partner, but to be connected to her process. You start throwing solutions at her, you're getting her out of her heart and into her head. And that's the disparity. That's the disconnect. That's I'm jarred now because I'm so in my heart and I'm expressing from this energetic, from this place within myself. And you're trying to get me here. And she's not thinking that, of course, but that's what's happening. And it's this massive pull. It's like you're in this beautiful deep sleep, and then all of a sudden lights go on, sirens go, you're fucking disorientated. That's exactly what happens when men try to fix their women, right? Especially when it's not asked for, because then they're not empowered either. They're just being told this is what you need. So the cascade effect of that, and look, men are well intentioned. The masculine energetic is well intentioned. This isn't demonizing men or masculinity. And again, I want to be very fucking clear. Solutions are necessary. Sometimes not always. Sometimes, most of the time, not necessarily in that moment. Unless it's a survival situation. Then there's no time for vulnerability. And unless you want to prioritize vulnerability and emotional expression over your physical life. It comes down to values. Like, seriously, your nervous system won't like that, though, because That's not what we're hardwired for in that sense, right? But unless you're in a life or death situation, there's no time for emotion. Absolutely agree with that. You've got to take action. There needs to be solutions. More than likely, it's not going to need a solution in that moment. The solution is, listen, hold space. What does hold space mean? Hold space means you've done enough inner work on yourself not to be triggered by what your partner is bringing to you. You're not taking it, even if it's about you or not about you. You're not taking it personally. You're not being offended by it now that you have to be defensive and now you have to be in your ego identity. A friend of mine said to me the other day, he said, can you, when you feel like you're being criticized by your partner, can you just absolutely not believe it? Not to not take accountability and responsibility for what you're experiencing, but the energetic behind the criticism, when it lands in your body harshly and you want to protect yourself and bite back and be abrasive and or scream or say no or be rude or whatever, can you absolutely not believe that? And another way to say that is, can I see my partner's 7-year-old wounded little girl in there, not to excuse her behavior, but to not react so it doesn't perpetuate the bullshit, both of our bullshits, and absolutely not believe what she's saying, unless it's coming from an elevated place in her divine femininity, call it, just to slap a term on it, right? Or her powerful femininity where she's coming with discernment and clarity. Don't believe the criticism. Don't believe the judgment. Know that it's coming from a wounded part of her. That's a fucking practice. Now we're talking about moving away from reacting the past again.
Yeah, that's a big one for sure. Because I mean, even speaking from experience, just taking things personally is such a key thing. It's like, wow, like, and just how, just to almost, it's like this animalistic part of the self gets animated through this process, right? It's like you don't even fucking think and you're just feeling this rage of emotion moving through you, and it's just like come up and out. And of course, if you have self-awareness, you reflect back on that, you're like, what the fuck did I do? But it's like in that moment, unless there is that true sense of discipline and we're really able to fully be with ourselves in that moment and not react and move into that space, yeah, it takes a lot of practice for sure. So there's a couple key things here that we've already mentioned. One, obviously, with everything, self-awareness, key. Compassion, very important. Moving into a space in which we, first and foremost, can be seen and witnessed within ourselves through what we talked about through men's work and men's circles, men's groups, and so forth. What other elements here are we missing that are really crucial to coming into a really expansive and more embodied state within our relationships, more conscious and intentional relationships?
Yeah, separate lives in our own personal practice, I think, is very, very important, right? So what does that look like? That looks like having your own interests, having your own hobbies. Again, friendships is part of that. I mentioned that earlier. I guess I didn't mention that earlier because I was referring to friendships and men's groups specifically, like doing inner work, but also friendships. But having your own interests, things that really, really drive you, having your own passion and purposes and so forth. So that's part of that sort of quote unquote separate life. Not separate to the point where your partner's not involved in that life. It's more that you're enjoying the essence of life, of being, of animation and expression in your own energy as well, right? And so part of that is having your own personal spiritual practice. Like, what's your practice? Is it breath work? Is it meditation? Is it being in nature? Is it disappearing once a quarter and going into the mountains and the woods and just spending time with yourself? And maybe you bring some sacred sacrament, maybe you don't, irrespective of that. That's not neither here nor there. Again, it's part of your personal practice. What is your personal practice? Do you work with a shaman or do you work with a coach? It's part of your personal practice. Do you have an exercise regime? Part of your personal practice. And I would say that every man, every human, full stop, not every man, every human needs to have a movement practice. Full stop. Whether that's hiking and walking, whether that's yoga, whether it's a combination of that and strength training or high volume calisthenics or martial arts or whatever the fuck it is that you want to do, cycling, swimming, it doesn't matter, man. It's just have a practice that's physically, we're meant to move physically. That's the whole point of being alive in this world. We've got to move, and we should move deliberately as well. So again, that's part of your personal practice. So if I sum it up in two things, it's personal practice and your own life, like your own interests, are really, really important, because the personal practice is going to ground you into who you are. And again, like one of the biggest things I need to do for myself, just speaking openly, is ensuring that I maintain all facets of my personal practice when I'm in flux, when I'm in overwhelm, when a lot of external unprepared for changes come into my life. And also not be hard on myself, simultaneously not be hard on myself if my personal practice lacks a little bit, right? And then where am I maintaining some staples in my life, like my training, my physical training, my silent practice, my reading, and if I can keep some staples in my life, I'm keeping grounded into the person that I am.
Yeah, I really love that. And I think that's incredibly crucial, and I've noticed when, for example, when I'm not moving and I'm not in a space in which I'm actually like moving my body regularly every single day, it's like I just get so caught up in the headspace, right? And anxiety sets in, stress, all of these things. But then when I just move that energy, even if for 20 or 30 minutes, it's like the dissipation of that energy, and it just kind of moves through. And then, of course, that then leads into what we were saying before, where we're not as reactive because we're more in the body, we're more in the heart space, especially if it's paired with that spiritual practice. And I really love what you mentioned there, getting into nature. And for me, that's been just key. It's a non-negotiable in my life. It's like, I'm away for 4 hours this day. I'm going on a hike. I'm by myself. I'm connecting with the land, and that's just a part of it. And I'm a better person because of it, and I show up in all my relationships better because of that. So, really, really key point. So, I guess just to wrap things up here and bring things full circle, right now I've at least witnessed, and maybe you have as well, and maybe you can speak to this a little bit deeper. I've witnessed these, it's more of like a transitory time that's happening within relationship. A lot of relationships that I've seen are ending quickly, and I feel like we're all being called into a new paradigm of relating, and we're being called into a new level of relating where sort of the old ways are no longer working, and that whether a relationship has to end or it has to evolve in some way. So I guess, like, in its highest essence, and we were to move into a new way of living, being, and relating in this world, what does that look like overall? And any other things that you want to throw in there that I think could be helpful for the men listening to this?
Well, I think it looks different for everyone, right? And it's different for everyone based on their own histories, their own trauma, their own patterns, their own desires and values and passions and purposes and all of that. And I definitely, I purposely pluralize purpose and passion, right? Because I think we're multifaceted beings, and we don't, I mean, some of us surely just have one particular specific purpose and very connected to that, but most of us throughout our lifetime will oscillate and shift a little bit, or in tangent have, um, you know, things that we're doing and being in the world that we're deeply, deeply passionate about. But if I understand your question correctly, it's let me repeat it back to you, and then you let me know, and we can elaborate on it. But I hear what you're asking is, how do we, as I guess, as men, as people, as partners, and also together in partnership, how do we evolve to the next level of, maybe collective conscious relating? Am I hearing that correctly?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think everything we've discussed, man, I really hold that to be very true for most of us. Everything that we've discussed, if you implemented those things, and then even when you look at the personal practice piece, right? Like, part of that, your personal practice could be taking personal responsibility. Part of your personal practice could be hydrating more during the day, getting sunlight, sleeping better. Like, all of that's going to improve your mood, which is going to improve the presence that you carry into relationship and intimacy. And there's simple things, like have a movement practice. Go out in nature once a week. We spoke about this when I was in Mexico. We were talking about nature and the importance of having nature and access to nature as a man specifically, and even being in solitude, that there. But in terms of, to add something else to what we've already spoken to, I think the next wave of relationships, they look like very much like this. They're not just there for themselves. They're asking the question of, does our relationship improve the lives of those that are in our lives, and does it improve and add value to the broader community? So, in other words, is my relationship with Christine, does it inspire those around me? I'm not saying that to the point where we have to be pedestalized. No, not at all. But is our relationship healthy, that others feel that when they're in our presence, right? And I also want that from other couples. I want to be inspired by other couples. And I think if we start thinking like that, as opposed to, what can I get from the relationship, or I'm only going to give if I get, or I'm okay giving, and I'm okay being, and I love being in the relationship, but we're not thinking beyond the container, the entity that is the relationship container itself. And we're not thinking about and giving attention to the impact it could be having on others, our children, our friends, our family, our communities, the world at large, maybe even, the solar system, the galaxy, et cetera, et cetera. Like, if everything is truly interconnected and interwoven at some level, even in the subtle, even in the minutiae of that, in the microest of microcosms, then I don't think we're going to evolve past the restraints of collective relating that we find ourselves in now. So I think asking that question sincerely and being connected to that question, and action, and then taking action on that question, because it requires we take action, right? Because we can ask the question, but we can just sit back and do nothing about it. But then if we ask the question, we've got to be prepared for the answer. We've got to be prepared for the exploration of where it may take us. And it may take us to some dark places, Chris. It may take us to some places that they're going to hurt our ego a little bit. It may bring up some shame and guilt. Well, then we've got to be prepared to work through the shame and guilt, sometimes together as a couple, sometimes separately, sometimes in oscillation, back and forth between the two. So can we be prepared to then actually face the things that have caused us to contract and retract in relationship? And that may mean not reliving our past, but revisiting what wasn't expressed in healthy ways, so that it can be free from our constitution. It can be free from our bodies, that we become a clearer and cleaner vessel of operation, of feeling, of sensing, of being with, of loving, of caring. So that question, as you can see, of just asking, is our relationship healthy for others in our lives, I think has a very healthy, positive cascade effect, or can do, into adding value to the collective essence of what it means to be in healthy, conscious union with self, with others. And you can ask that question even with your brother, with your child, with your father or your mother or your friend, right? Like, is our relationship adding value to the lives of others? And again, it's not about having the best relationship if there's a competition, whatever metrics we're gauging there. It's just about really being in healthy communion and checking yourself at every point of interaction, not obsessively, but just being aware of that.
I really love the simplicity of that, but also the depth of that. It's simple, but it's deep. And, just even contemplating that question for myself, and hearing reflections back from others, right? And this has happened specifically, with my son, right? And being with my son, I'm spend time every day with him in some capacity, and just being out in the world, and can see the way in which people either directly say something to me about our relationship without even knowing us, or just even witnessing us, and the way I'm with him as a present father, and all of that. And that in itself, I can see the ripple effect that that's having on those that are in witness to that. And I take a lot of, I don't like the word pride, but I really, really love to be able to put that onto display as a way of authenticity, that it's not forced, it's just how I am and how I'm being in any given moment with him. And so, yeah, I really love that question a lot. So I guess just to bring things totally full circle here. Is there anything else that we may have left on the table that you want to share? Any other last piece of wisdom, insights from your heart to those listening?
I think as men, we need to be. I'll get in a slight rant here. Okay, I think the generation of today, as men, we're a little fucking weak. Actually, I don't put myself in that category. And I don't put you in that category. But as a whole, we're not as resilient as what I believe we once used to be. Now, I'm not calling for let's go to war or let's be in harsh environments like we once were, like our ancestors were hundreds of thousands of years ago in order to be more resilient. But I see us as a society of avoiders. We avoid and we move towards convenience. We avoid difficulty and challenge and we move towards convenience. And here's my take on life in this way, especially for men. If you don't actively welcome challenge in your life, because challenge is one of the domains of the masculine, it's how we grow. It's how we all grow as humans, through challenge, but specifically men, and specifically physical and, any challenge, but physical and spiritual challenge, like the asceticism around that, or the deep delving into taking our being, our bodies and our minds to places that we've never been. It brings something out of us and it shifts us and changes us. And I think for the better. I truly believe that. So if we don't actively seek challenge, challenge will find us and it'll be very fucking uncomfortable and very abrupt. And it'll be far more uncomfortable than if you deliberately seek challenge. That could be exercising. That could be cold exposure. That could be having a difficult conversation. That could be being vulnerable when you know you need to, but you don't. That could be sharing yourself and taking a risk of rejection or humiliation. That could be doing some deeper inner work on your family lineage, healing the wounds with your mother and or your father. Could be having to forgive, maybe yourself, maybe others. Could be facing your shame and your guilt. You get where I'm going with this? Like, we have to actively pursue challenge to be more resilient. The only fucking reason why all of us are here today is because those before us were resilient enough, particularly our ancestors from many, many moons ago, where our physical environment was quite harsh, because they were resilient. They were physically and mentally resilient. Spiritually resilient, I would say. And as a result of that, depending on how far back we go, deeply connected to land. We're not deeply connected to land right now. And that's a big thing that's missing in man's life. And so we've got to seek challenge in healthy ways. Now, again, they say, oh, okay, cool. I'm an extreme athlete and I jump off buildings and I do this and I do that. Great. And you're actively doing that. But what's your come from? Because I would even argue that most extreme athletes, and I've been there myself, that are doing or engaging in adrenaline-fueled activities excessively or a lot, most of them, the far majority, and again, I don't have any empirical evidence for this, is anecdotal, they are running from something within themselves, psychosocially, psycho-emotionally. They're wounded, little boys or girls, they're wounded, and they're running from that. And let me tell you something. The cascade of hormones that move through you when you're in a flow state or when adrenaline's pumping, it's a great distraction from not feeling your shit, the shit that you haven't felt for many, many years and decades. So seek challenge, but seek it from a place of authenticity. The come from really matters. And be aware of where you bring your stuff. That's why I come back full circle to the first question around join a men's group. Bring your stuff there. If I had an order of sequence, for me personally, this is how I work. I sit in solitude with my stuff, sometimes longer than I should, sometimes longer than I need to, but sometimes not. Sometimes just the right amount. And every time is different and I'm getting better at it because I'm exposing myself to this practice. Then, not only when I can't resolve it internally, but even if I can resolve it internally, when it's still raw, I bring it to my men's group. I let them witness me. And then once we've moved through certain processes, I either will or will not, depending on the relative nature of what I'm moving through and how relative it is to our relationship, will bring it to my wife. But I won't bring it so raw that it's so overwhelming for her, where I'm in such a masculine intensity that she shouldn't need to hold that. Now, there may be times when she needs to, circumstantially, but most of the time, no. So that's sort of my order there. And then there's nuances to that, but that's essentially how I work internally for self.
I love that. And of course, there's the daily practices that you mentioned before, right? So those kind of just pile on top of that, but beautifully stated. And I love the practical and grounded guidance in that aspect. So yeah, brother, thank you for this time today and for sharing your heart in this way and for just laying it on the line. I really, really appreciated this conversation. So, people that maybe aren't familiar with your work, where can people tune in with you and find you?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chris. It was a wonderful conversation. I felt I spoke too much or a lot, but
It
again,
was
I guess
perfect.
I just like hearing from you too. But we'll connect when I'm back in Mexico next month or so. Um, Stefanos at Stefanos Sifandos, all social media channels, and stefanosifandos.com for my website. You find everything I'm doing there. And I'll just throw this in there. At stefanosifandos.arabic is my channel for the Arabic community. I have an affinity with the Middle East and India as well. But I just recently have launched that channel. It's a very soft launch, and it's all translated in modern day Arabic. So yeah, if any of the viewers would prefer to listen to some of that, transmission in Arabic, please go there.
Beautiful,
YouTube,
man.
TikTok, Facebook, Instagram.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and deeply appreciate you and everything you're doing. And we'll connect soon, man.
Thank you, brother. Thank you so much.